if you look at right livelihood, it's interesting. It basically means right speech and right action. If you look at the definition, which is sometimes misleading. And if you look at it, in this case I think it is, because if you look at it you think, why did the Buddha have to add right livelihood? When right livelihood really, the definition is refraining from livelihood that involves wrong action and wrong speech. So all the kinds of wrong action, or at least I guess the lying, or all kinds of wrong action, or lying, wrong speech. If you do that to make a living, that's wrong livelihood. But then you think, well, but then if you're keeping right speech and right livelihood, why do we need to mention a right speech and right action? Why do you need to mention right livelihood? But I think it is quite important. I think this belies the fact that right livelihood is an important part of who we are. At its very essence, livelihood means staying alive. What do you do to stay alive? And it was a big part of the Buddha's conception of the monastic life. And I don't think this would have been something even unfamiliar to him. It was something he had to deal with for 6 years. Once he left the palace, it was a question, how do you stay alive? Because suddenly he didn't have a livelihood. And so a big part of spiritual practice at the time was to go without food, or to go with a very bare minimum of food, under the realization that livelihood is a big deal. If you want to stay alive, if you want food, you've got to do quite a bit of work to get it, even just food. And then there's clothing, shelter, medicine. So from the very beginning, this was something that would have weighed on the Bodhisattva's mind, and of course was something the Buddha had to consider when organizing his community, even just living himself. So it actually weighs in quite significantly how we live our lives, beyond simply wrong action and wrong speech. I mean, at the very outset, there's the question of what is right livelihood, right? If you don't define it the way the Buddha did, there's a question about livelihood, and people feel righteous or even guilty about their livelihood, potentially for the wrong reasons. Maybe a person has a dull job that is meaningless, pointless, and they think this is, they don't label it this way, but they think it's wrong livelihood. They think it's wrong because when you should enjoy your job, right? You should do something you love. And other people do something they love and they think that's right livelihood because it makes them happy. And so even just defining livelihood, right livelihood, as having nothing to do with whether you like it or dislike it, but having more to do with, is it wholesome or unwholesome? Is it involved with wholesomeness or unwholesomeness? Is a significant step, and it clarifies some of the guilt we might feel at being insignificant. I'm just a menial laborer, or maybe I work at McDonald's or something. Maybe I have a job that is very insignificant, or maybe someone is famous, People think the greatest livelihood wouldn't, to be a famous doctor or scientist, or someone who changes the world. That would be the best sort of livelihood. For a monk, it would be to be the Dalai Lama. That would be you're such a public figure who ostensibly does such great good in the world. But that's not the measure of right livelihood. None of that is really. A monk living off in the forest who nobody knows can have perfect livelihood. They can also have terrible livelihood. They can be killing wild animals for food, which would be very bad. But so basically, again, the part of this path that orients us, the part of this factor that orients us, is around the right action and right speech. So your livelihood is okay. It's within the boundaries of what will lead you to the noble path. Again, talking about the preliminary path, the cultivation. If you keep basically the 5 precepts, if you don't kill, if your livelihood is not to kill, obviously, and steal or cheat or lie, that's a good basis for right livelihood. But of course it's not yet right livelihood, and any livelihood that involves torturing others, manipulating others, even any livelihood that involves greed or ambition, from a meditative point of view, is wrong livelihood. Even at a meditation center, if you start requesting special food, or if you go out and, as a meditator, if you go out to the store and buy food, if you worry about food, is it delicious, does it taste good, that kind of thing, this you could call wrong livelihood, or in line with wrong livelihood, of course on a much lower level. But what it means is we have this necessity to go and eat, but we're making it complicated. It's becoming a hindrance. Your need to stay alive is getting in the way. And so the question for the Buddha was always, how do you keep this from getting in the way? The need to wear clothing really gets in the way, because of course you have to go out, and first you have to make all the money, and then you have to go and buy the clothes, choose the clothes, or maybe if at the very least you have to make clothes, which is a lot of work itself. And then even worse, you start to get attached to the clothes. Maybe you wear beautiful clothes, and you get this image, this is what the kind of clothes that I wear, and this makes me look like this sort of person. Easy to get complicated. What you have to do to stay alive, or to get the things that you want. So the greatest right livelihood, of course, is the monastic life. From a Buddhist point of view, this is why the Buddha created it. He envisioned monastic life as the best way to stay alive, without engaging in all the complicated livelihood-related issues. So he said, for food, you take whatever people give you, alms. As a spiritual person, it's not easy to find support, to find a community and people who are willing to keep you alive. For robes, for clothing, you just take rags, scraps of cloth that are discarded, and put them together. The kind of equivalent nowadays would be to, at the least for a lay person, to go to the second-hand clothing store. For a monk, it would be to go to the rejects, second-hand clothing store, the stuff they throw away, they give away for free. Sorry, just reading something. I'll have to talk about that later. So I mean, it's not a matter of having to become a monk to gain right livelihood, but it's important to understand this, to see this as a linear progression, right? the worst kind of livelihood is where you're doing the most awful things to stay alive, or to make money, to live a lifestyle that is grotesque, and slowly simplifying our life. Again, thinking about wholesomeness, what keeps us and what allows us to continue our life, all the way to living in a meditation center or a monastery, where you're in your room and you say, well, if I don't go for food, I'm going to starve, and I'm not going to be able to meditate. And considering what is the best way to get that food, the simplest way. You have to consider, because if you don't eat the right food or enough food, it'll be hard to meditate as well. So it doesn't mean that you don't ask for food. If there's something missing in our diet here, you have to let us know. Or if you need special food and you're allergic to this type of food, don't just eat it and suffer. But again, these are all issues. It points out that livelihood is, for all of us, an important part of our path. So it's not just about right action and right speech. It's about understanding our livelihood and making it, staying alive, and not allowing the necessities of life to get in our way, making them the least complicated and the least of a hindrance as possible.